What's going on, guys? In today's video we're going to be looking at a tournament that I played out of state in Seattle, which is pretty rare. So this tournament was 5 rounds, and each game was 75 minutes plus a 30-second delay for every move. So let's just jump into the first game here. I'm up against an 1800 younger player, so got to be careful of these younger players. They can really be dangerous if you let your guard down, so that might be some subtle foreshadowing. This will be a longer form video because I do plan to cover all of the games. Um, yeah, I have a game collection here, so the spoiler blocker is exactly what it looks like. It's just gonna block the spoilers because you can actually see the game results on the side here. So in this opening, my idea is basically to trade a lot of the pieces, and then in the end of the game, I'm gonna have a better pawn structure. I get this opening pretty often. Tartakower variation of the Caro-Kann. It's pretty common, easy to play for black to some extent. You just kind of put the pieces on where they belong, and yeah, the king's usually pretty safe. But this move h5 was kind of misplaced. I think my opponent might have confused some lines because sometimes h5 g6 this idea is good, but in this case I can just punish immediately with knight to f4, and I get this a lot in blitz as well. Basically the idea is my opponent can't play g6 because then I can just sack the knight, and I get this very strong attack here, and black is already busted. So that means black has to take, and now I get the two bishops for free, and I'm more developed. So white has a pretty comfortable advantage. I go queen to b3, attacking b7, and here I kind of make a strategical slight inaccuracy. I trade queens, which is not bad. I'm still better after trading queens, but I think practically I should have just kept the queens on the board so that they can complement my two bishops better. Okay, and here is where I start to kind of misunderstand the position. I should have tried to play against this weakness over here because this is where I have the advantage. So you'll see later I actually played this move a3, but I should have went a4 instead. This would have been much better because it just kind of cements this pawn structure here that I can try to go after. But after I play a3, I let my opponent play b5. This is a very strong move, and it actually equalizes immediately. And this is the reason this is such a big problem for me is because the light squares are just hard for me to control. My opponent's just going to go knight to b6 and then knight to c4, bishop on d5. And if I try to play b3, then my entire pawn structure kind of gets weakened. So basically, I no longer have an advantage on the queen side, and the king side's so stable for black. Black just has literally no weaknesses, and I just can't break through. So I kind of realized just after I played b5, I realized that I made a mistake, and it's kind of too late to play a4 now because black's pieces are just actually really about to be really well placed. So that was kind of frustrating for me, but I knew that if I just kept applying pressure, then maybe at some point my opponent might make a mistake. So unfortunately, I am forced to trade rooks because I can't keep control of the file, and now I play b3 to try to keep the knight out. And here, my whole idea is to try to play for c4, but the problem is this pawn b5 is just so strong, just dominating all of my pawns, stopping all of my pawn breaks, so it's really hard to get anything going. So I just try my best to reroute my pieces. But here, I spent so much time, as you can see, eventually I spent so much time thinking about how am I going to play c4, like all this rerouting, that I just completely forgot that my pawn was hanging on b3 because the knight moved away. So like I played f4, I was about to hit the clock, I was like, oh shoot, my pawn. But like I can't take it back because I already released the piece, so I might as well like just press the clock. It's like, bro, I just hung a pawn. And so my opponent obviously takes the pawn, and I'm like, okay, bro, I just hung a pawn. Okay, well now I have to make sure I'm not losing. Of course I'm worse because I'm down a pawn, but okay, I saw that I have bishop e2 and then f5, and I can try to get something going on the king's side. My opponent plays king to e7, we get bishop d3, and now the one trick I have here is my opponent take, and I go back to e2. I don't recapture, I go to e2 because I want to take this pawn and get a passed pawn here. And a passed pawn would be really good because when I have the bishops, passed pawns are really good, and my opponent has a knight, so my knights are pretty bad at stopping passed pawns. And my opponent also has this tripled pawn wall, and I'm actually down like 2 pawns here, but because of this pawn wall, it gets kind of awkward to get back and stop this passed pawn that I'm about to get. So I knew that I was obviously not winning right here, but if I put really good pressure on my opponent, then maybe I can break through with these pawns. But it's not looking very likely right now because this queen side is just so solid, and my opponent can just always keep the king over here. Okay, so here I go for sort of a desperation, like try to just blow the game open. I play c4. So okay, what's the idea? Well, the idea is this can be taken in three different ways. So first, let's look at the pawn. Well, if the pawn takes, then I just get a fork because the pawn made way for the bishop. I had to push this pawn because otherwise, like, this bishop is just never going to get into the game. My opponent's just going to go knight c4, knight d6, knight to e4, and then start pushing these pawns, and then I might even be in danger of losing if it goes wrong. Okay, so if my opponent takes with the knight, my idea was to check, and then, I don't know, king e6, and my idea was just like, I don't know, I was just hoping that with these tripled pawns here, maybe my opponent's pieces just wouldn't be able to get back, and after something like this, I could maybe just push my h pawn all the way up the board, but it doesn't. But of course, it doesn't quite work. My opponent just takes this pawn here, and then moves the knight back this way. But okay, my opponent ended up taking with the bishop, which is most natural because obviously it's a check. I move the king, and I'm still threatening this bishop to b4 move, and this knight is kind of flimsy on the edge of the board. It's kind of squishy over here. So I'm threatening bishop to b4, and even if it's not check, if the knight moves, king c2 still traps the piece. So my opponent has to be careful. We get bishop b3, which is the best move, and now knight to c2. And I actually missed b4, so I didn't see that this was possible. It's not the end of the world, but I was hoping that I was just going to be able to play king to b4 and try to like attack these pieces that way. So my opponent tries to go to f8, which is logical, but it gives me some free moves, and now I am completely okay, whereas before I had some trouble with these pawns moving down the board. Okay, so now I play d5, and my idea is to just like try to try to clean up these pawns. If I can clean up the pawns, then, and if I can somehow like win all three of these pawns, it's very unlikely, but if I win all three of these pawns, then two bishops versus two knights, maybe I can start trying to win these pawns, and then maybe at the very, very end, these two pawns can be sort of a threat. My opponent plays c5, and I knew this was a mistake, not because it makes not because it's losing on the spot, but it's because it gives me this passed pawn, and although black also has these passed pawns, I do have a king here, which is going to make it a lot slower, and this king is kind of caught between two passed pawns on the side here. So if we actually took away the minor pieces, I would be completely winning because the black king just wouldn't be able to stop the pawns. So now I know that my plan is to either trade the pieces or to just apply a lot of pressure with these two pawns. So I go bishop to c3, trying to attack this f6 pawn, and I knew that knight d4 was possible to block, but then I could maybe just take it and then take on b3, and then we could maybe trade all the minor pieces, for example, like this. And I am a little bit better here. And I just thought that this would be strategically winning because, just because of the passed pawns. And I think it looks like I'm right about that. So I thought that black would basically have to commit to one side, which is good for me because it just makes the other side more strong. But I missed this knight to e3 move, and my opponent missed it as well. But knight to e3 would have been really, really strong because it attacks both pieces. I have to go bishop f3, and now king g7, and the difference is now the knight is on a really good spot here. Whereas here it's not possible because now I can play bishop to d2 to stop it. But I didn't really think this was a problem until my opponent played it, and now I realized that, okay, this c4 square is really powerful. And also, I want to play king a3 here, but this would be a really big blunder because it actually allows b5, and now knight to c4 is actually a checkmate, which is pretty cool. Very cool geometry there. So instead, I have to move the bishop away, and now I'm just kind of hoping that I can deal with all these pieces. My opponent goes knight d5, I go bishop, stay on this diagonal because eventually I want to push and attack this pawn. Of course I'm worse here because these pawns are just moving down the board and this d7 square is covered, but my opponent starts to get low on time and starts to make some mistakes, like c4. This was not necessary, this just opens up a lot of squares for me. I go d6, b6, bishop d5, attacking this pawn, knight e5. Now I move the king up, and now my opponent finally blunders or makes a mistake with checking me again, because now I can go to a3, and I'm still going to be able to win some pawns. And okay, if b2, my plan was just to takes, and then I have these two white pipos again, and I am winning in this position. My opponent instead blunders immediately with bishop to b5, and now after bishop takes c4, I'm completely winning. So Yeah, and I went on to win this game pretty easily. So this was pretty lucky for me. I escaped a really bad position. I had a really good position out of the opening, but then I just messed up with that 1a3, allowing b5. That was kind of sloppy for me. I should have realized that I should keep these pawns situated here on the queen side. But eventually I was able to just apply a lot of pressure. It was a really big risk. I really took a big risk there, but it ended up paying off, and I was able to win the first game. Okay, so let's move to the second game here. I'm up against, or this is not the next game. I don't like that. I don't like that it spoils the end of the game whenever you click on the next game. But oh well, I'll just try to be fast. Okay, I completely messed that up. Okay, in the second game, I'm up against a 1900 here. We get this very common Queen's Gambit declined line. I'm just going to skip through the entire opening. The first critical moment was here when I played c5. Okay, so c5 is a good move. But my idea was to play knight to a6 and then try to go to b4 and get this bishop and then just have a bishop versus a knight. Or I could try to get a bishop to a6 if he takes and then stop white from castling. That was my idea. But it doesn't work because it doesn't quite work because of this move queen a4. Now I thought this was okay because I wanted to go bishop to d3, but just tactically it just isn't quite there. I'm just kind of trapped with, the bishop's kind of just stranded by itself. What I should have done is played knight to d7 instead, because now there's no bishop takes a6, and I'm going to win this pawn back. I'm going to have a good position with the knight here and the bishop here, targeting the center pawn also. I'm completely equalized here also. And c6 is not possible because of rook c8. Takes would be good for me because I can still go to c8, ignore it, and then after my opponent, say, moves, I can actually just take, and then rook c8 again, and I'm just never letting white castle, just constant pressure. And then I go here, knight c5, very strong move, because now if white tries to castle, actually I have rook to d8 winning the piece, so I'm just leaving this pawn here. I don't care, I'm just going to keep making threats and keep pressuring. This was actually what I was going for. I like to just like keep making these threats, because there's a quote by Kasparov that says like make 10 threats and your opponent's going to blunder or something like that. So that's what I was going for, but I just kind of moved the knight to the wrong spot. I thought knight a6 was good because it was threatening knight b4, but it's not necessary. I should have just went to d7. But okay, my opponent found this very good line. Credit to my opponent. And now I'm forced into this kind of weird queen f6. I had to do this to pin the knight, otherwise I was just going to lose the bishop. And important to note that here I cannot go queen to g5 with the fork, because that's just going to hang the bishop on d3, because the knight protects the rook. Okay, so what ended up happening in the game is my opponent just took, which I thought was kind of just kind of let me off the hook. Instead, f4 was strong, because this would actually force out b4 to, I don't know why I said force out, Clash Royale. Okay, this would force b4 to get the bishop out, and then my opponent would just have this passed pawn. My opponent said after the game that he was afraid of g5, but it's not a problem because my opponent can just go queen to f2, and he also saw this, but he didn't evaluate it as very strong. Maybe he missed that the knight was going to attack the bishop and threaten this fork on d7, so maybe he missed that. So, but alas, he takes the takes, I take, and now my opponent just starts to make some inaccurate moves and lets me get all the way back into the game. I play b4, very nice move, stopping b4 himself to protect the pawn on c5. Now I'm able to win the pawn back, and actually win it back with interest. Now I have a really good position because of the expansion on the queen side and the activity of my pieces. My queen's just very strong in the center of the board like this. So queen to d7, rook f8. I played rook f8 just so that the queen couldn't harass the rook, but a nice finesse would have been rook to a8 first, and then if queen b7, then rook to f8, because the difference here is that my opponent doesn't have this queen to a4 move. And this queen to a4 move is good because my opponent isn't trying to take, because that would allow rook to a8 and rook to a2. My opponent's trying to play a3 to try to win the pawn back that way. So I actually missed this idea. This was well played by my opponent under time pressure, but I can still pressure like this, b3. Rook to c2, check, and he has to trade queens into this rook endgame, and I was happy with the draw, kind of happy with the draw because of how the opening went. I kind of messed up, so it's pretty good for me to be able to escape like that, but I am up a pawn, so I might as well try to just maximize my winning chances, even though it is, of course, objectively a draw. So I went for this one. I could have traded this pawn for this pawn, but I decided to try to trade for this pawn because at least that gives me a passed pawn. I can try to push this majority. And in some cases, if I can trade these pawns or somehow, 2 versus 1s are very hard to draw when you have the 1, even if it's a passed pawn. So I have like this. My opponent did end up just taking, which I'm fine with. I didn't actually like my chances with the rook here, just kind of dangerous to be honest. So okay, I tried to do something here. And I knew here the only way that I was gonna win is if I kind of trade one pawn for two pawns, and then I have the two pawns remaining. So I was going for that, and I also knew that if my opponent was able to just get a really stable pawn structure, then I would never break through, because this position is just a pretty easy draw, way easier than 4 versus 3. Um, 4 versus 3, there are more nuances, but okay, I just kind of shuffle around, and I knew that I was going to try to bait out these pawns to push as far as possible, because the further they push, the weaker they are. That's a general principle. So that actually does end up happening. I was very happy to see g4 and h5. Well, not very happy, but I knew that at least this was giving me like one little trick, which is rook g5 and then f5 to try to break open the pawn structure. Now it never works, because right here if I go for f5, there's actually f6 because the king is pinned, so I can't do it right now. So I just try to shuffle around and inconspicuously, and my opponent does actually allow it with rook to a7. My opponent, of course, should have just kept checking me and then kept making sure that the pawn is pinned, but my opponent just wasn't even thinking about this f6 problem at all. Okay, so we get takes and takes, check. It's still a draw, of course, because like worst case, my opponent just plays f6, and this two pawns is difficult to draw, but I think because of the king's activity, it's shouldn't be too big of a problem to make the draw, but okay. I end up going here and my opponent loses on time, but he didn't see f6, so he would have lost anyways, because if you don't see f6, then you're just going to lose this pawn, and then it's going to be 2 versus 1. So my opponent was on time pressure. It is 30-second increment, but my opponent just couldn't find a move here. And yeah, just kind of lost on time because he didn't know what to do. Like, all the moves he saw were losing. For example, you have to protect this pawn. If you go rook b5, just move a king in. So yeah, let's see yeah, I think f6 is the only move to. It might be the only move to draw, or if you check. Yeah, it looks like any other sensible move just loses. So yeah, he didn't see this, but even if he did do this, it would still be like not that easy because the king is cut off. So my king is also cut off, but I don't know. I can maybe try to get something going and just keep pressuring with time, under time pressure. But okay, that was the second game. I got lucky again, of course. So now I'm 2 out of 2, and in the next game I get paired against the number 1 seed, which is Grandmaster Vladimir Belos. So let's see how this game goes. We get the Rouser opening, and the first critical moment was this queen b6. I haven't seen this line before. I'm used to other moves like, I don't know, g6 or something, like e6. I went for f4 because it's somewhat common, but in this case, it's not that good. I should have just went like knight to b3 or something. But okay, he trades the queens, which is sensible because this endgame's like at least equal for black. And now he plays knight to h5 though. I wasn't sure about this idea. Obviously he's trying to take on f4 and then play e5, but I can play this move f5, and now I'm kind of gaining some space. So he plays g6, now I go g4, gaining more space, and now he plays h6, and I go for the extra pawn here just because, like, okay, if I have an extra pawn, then I'm basically forcing him to create something with the 2 bishops, otherwise I'm just going to be up a pawn. So I think it's better to play, like, just force out, like, forcing ideas for my opponent, because like minimizes his outplay potential or something like that. But okay. Like I also just thought I could like defend with this extra pawn, like in the time that my opponent takes to get the pawn back. I would just like improve my position. But instead I could also play bishop to e6 and then knight to f6, rook to b4, like this using the rook. And then I would also be attacking this pawn, but yeah, I would be able to take this pawn. Knight takes. And this is like kind of unclear, but I would have this possibility of making a passed pawn on the queen side, and this would be kind of an interesting endgame. Okay, but instead I went for this line here, bishop g7 of course, bishop b5, all very logical moves. I go bishop c4 here, with the idea that my opponent cannot take this pawn because then this pawn would queen. My opponent quickly moved e6, but king to f8 would actually be very strong here because if my opponent doesn't have to play e6, the pawn structure is a lot stronger. The pawns are on dark squares where my bishop cannot touch, and now this bishop can get into the game like this. So this would be very dangerous. And this check doesn't do anything because after king g7, the king's just going to take the pawn, and then I'm just going to get like cooked. This bishop on e5 is just super strong because it's the perfect distance from my knight. Okay, but we got e6 quickly, now go knight b5. After the game, my opponent said that he didn't really like this idea of like knight to c7, but I just thought that like it kind of ties his pieces down, and if I can get like a forcing sequence, then I just get a draw. So that was kind of what I was going for here. My opponent plays bishop f4 here, and here's where I realized that he actually has this move d5 to kind of discover to attack my knight and also attack my bishop. But luckily it doesn't work right away because I can actually just take, and if my opponent takes, then I have rook f7, and then my pawns become way too strong here. So my opponent can't do it right away. Instead we have rook to g8 trying to get this pawn first. I go h4 trying to just eliminate this passed pawn. My opponent goes back to e5, good move, centralizing the bishop, and now I go rook h1. So my opponent says that rook h1 is a good move, and I agree. It's a good idea to try to get this rook on the checking distance. My opponent actually makes a mistake here. He plays d5 right away, which is a huge blunder, and I realized immediately this is a blunder because I have rook check first, and now my opponent cannot go to d8 and attack the knight like this. He had to go to d6. If my opponent goes to d8, then I can actually just take. After takes, I have a rook h8 check, and then d takes e6. This is kind of easy to miss because, like, I don't know, you win the piece, you kind of just stop calculating. But I do have this really nice resource, and this would save the game because my opponent wouldn't be able to take, and I would just be able to, it would just be a draw. So instead my opponent had to go to d5, d6 like this, and now I thought that I was going to be okay. But it's still really kind of dangerous because the bishops are very active. My king is out in the open, my pieces are kind of loose here. So I had to find the best way to consolidate. And I missed this b4 move. Like, I ended up going for bishop b3, which is a mistake because he just gets to win the pawn back with like better pieces. I should have just played b4. I don't know why I didn't see this idea. Just save the pawn and restrict the king as well. This would have been pretty strong. It's still not completely clear how I can draw the game because, like, if my opponent's like just like wins back one pawn, then the two bishops are going to be better. So he can just like push like the entire game. I was also getting a little bit low on time, so this is kind of scary. So I give back a pawn because I thought that I could maybe try to cheese like a trade. I was just trying to be very forcing here because I knew that if I played two passes, my opponent would just improve the bishops, and I might get overwhelmed. And I almost blundered like 5 times. Like, I almost played knight to a5 check, which would just hang the knight. So, like, this is just so dangerous. Like, the two bishops are just so, like, there's just so many tactics that I have to dodge. So we get bishop to c8, now I go bishop d5 check, with the idea that if he takes, then I have this rook to c7 move, which would get this pawn back. I thought this would be an immediate draw, but I missed that there's actually bishop to e6, and then king to c6, which my opponent pointed out to me after the game. And then I would actually lose this pawn. It's still a pretty easy draw, I think, because I can just go c3, cut off the bishop, and if I ever trade the rook for the bishop, it's just an automatic draw because of the wrong-colored bishop. So my opponent didn't go for this, instead just moved the king. And now I had the option of going knight to c4 or trying to trade the bishop. So if I went knight to c4, then we would get this this position. Of course, it's a draw objectively, but it's not so simple because like my opponent's pieces are very active. My pieces are kind of I don't know. It just looked kind of dangerous. Like, if I lose this a pawn, then it's it looks like I might be in trouble. Instead, I thought that I could just check on h6 and then like force the bishops off like this in this way, because then the king's less active, the knight's in a better spot. But I just completely missed this. My opponent played it instantly, and I ended up resigning after a few minutes, just making sure that I didn't have anything. So I was very, very unhappy, but like there's just a lot of taxes I have to dodge. It's hard to hold. If I played b4, I definitely would have had a better time. I spent a lot of time on that move as well, but maybe I should have just I should have just prioritized like saving this pawn, because if I have an extra pawn, it's pretty hard to throw because like I'm up a pawn, so he has to like do something really crazy. He also just had takes. This is a really bad blunder, by the way. Like there's no reason to be blundering. This had like 19 minutes. But oh well, I thought it was just yeah. Like I think overall I played okay. Opening, yeah, I kind of got surprised with this queen b6, but even after that, I had a decent position. Obviously, black's a little bit better with the two bishops, especially with the strong bishop on e5. But my opponent did mess up, and I kind of punished him. But at the end, there's just too much pressure. So yeah, that was the third game. So now I am on, what is it? I'm on 2 out of 3, moving into the 4th game against another kid. There are a lot of kids that play chess, and they're very scary. But okay, I'm playing with the black pieces here. We got the Meroxy Bind. A lot of Accelerated Dragon players don't like the Meroxy Bind, but if you play the dragon and you don't like this, then I would recommend this line. Daniel actually showed this in a stream once. I was just tuning into a random stream, and then he was talking about playing the Accelerated Dragon, which is what I play, so I was just watching that. And he said that this line's pretty good because the idea is just you go for a6 and b5, queen a5, like bishop e6. And this is usually a pretty solid idea to try to break through. So I'm going to place f4. All the kids really like gaining space, just because like it looks good. So yeah, this wasn't surprising at all. I go b5. My opponent played f5, also not very surprising. And I spent a lot of time thinking and played e5. So okay, I didn't expect this at all. I thought the possible moves were like knight to d5. You know, it's funny, I actually played a blitz game today, which featured this move. And it was really nice because I was calculating this game during the classical game, which I'm showing you right now. So then in the blitz game, when my opponent played knight d5, I was able to move instantly because I had already calculated this exact position. And the thing that I calculated was takes, fork, like this, and then takes, and knight b6 is not possible here because of bishop d4, which is a fork. So instead, white has to take like this. Black has to take like this, and then I take, and we get this endgame, where I don't know. It's like all right. I did actually end up losing this game, which is unfortunate, but it did mean that I didn't have to calculate knight d5. Wait, okay. It looks like I have a better move though. Instead. Oh wait. Oh, I should wait. Yeah, I take the knight. I take the knight because I get this endgame. Yeah, this endgame is good because of the because like the pawns are kind of weird like that. I don't know. Okay, but this didn't happen. Whatever. My opponent played e5, and the idea is if I take, then we get takes, and then my opponent can attack the rook, and then win the bishop here. So I saw that pretty quickly. It's like, okay, this looks weird though, and the reason it looks weird is because I have this b4. b4 is a very nice move, it attacks the knight. If my opponent moves the knight, I take the pawn. So my opponent has to take. Now I take, attacking the queen. So my opponent has no time to keep taking like this. So my opponent has to either take my pawn or move the queen. If my opponent moves the queen, I take this pawn, which is good for me because then I win the pawn. If my opponent takes the pawn, then I go takes, and then I'm attacking the rook, and then I take back with this bishop, and I'm up a clean pawn with a very good pawn structure. So that would be just basically winning for black. So my opponent instead goes queen to d3 and tries to go for this sacking the rook like this, which is, I don't know, it's kind of desperate, but I understand why he went for it because it's kind of hard to sit in a pawn down endgame, and instead just play for cheese is like kind of easier. Okay, here I went rook to e8, attacking both of these loose bishops. We get bishop to f3, and here I actually missed that after rook to d8, my opponent had this move bishop to b6. And I was thinking about lines here, and I just thought for a long time, and eventually I decided that queen to g5 would be good for me, because if my opponent takes the pawn, which is what he did in the game, I have this rook to e1, I have rook d to e8, and getting out of the attack of the bishop, and if the point is the my opponent takes, then the queen can no longer block on g3, so I have queen to h4, which wins the game immediately. So my opponent can't take, my opponent went queen to d4 instead, and there's a lot of calculations, but I won't show them because it's just really technical. I went bishop to c6 now, nice move because if my opponent takes, then I have rook 8 to e2 check, and then my opponent has to step in front of the bishop, and then I can just take, and it's winning. So my opponent can't take. My opponent can't really do anything, because if you move the queen, then I have queen h4. If you move the rook, well, we're going to move the rook. I'm threatening to take, so I'm also threatening to play rook to e2 check, which is really nice, because if the bishop takes, then I have queen takes g2. So my opponent played g3, I take. If rook takes, there's a checkmate, so king takes, and then queen h5, and my opponent resigned, because if my opponent moves the king, then it gets checkmated. If my opponent blocks with the queen, we have the rook forced divorce. I got that from Reels, the chess, shout out the chess Viking. Um, yeah. And then if g4, then I have this. So my opponent resigned. This was a pretty good game. This is actually the only good game that I played the entire tournament. There's one more game, but you will soon see that wasn't exactly the best game. Okay, and I'll just show you what I'm talking about. We get the whatever this variation, and I played knight to b3. This is just a complete hallucination. I was supposed to play a4 first to stop b5, or I could go f4. Those are both moves, but knight to b3 is bad because it just allows b5 like this. This is a pretty bad opening mistake. And I was really mad for. I was like really mad because for messing this up. I was just playing way too careless. And this is just good for black because now I can't. Now black just has like completely equalized. And like just really good space and like all my ideas don't work anymore. Like a4, my opponent has b4 now, and I can't. I basically just can't do what I want to do. So I go f4, bishop f3. Like this is still normal, but black's just a little bit better because of the queen side. So I'll play a4, just trying to do something. My opponent plays a5, and now like I'm kind of tilted still, so I just hang a pawn. I play knight d5, knight d4, trying to go to b5, and I just completely I just like forget that my opponent can just literally take like discovered attack on my pawn, and he just wins a pawn. And if I take with the queen, then not only do I kind of hang c2, but also my opponent can just castle. The queen's really bad here, and my center is just falling apart. So bad, so bad. So I'm really mad right now, but I know that I still have to try to create some complications if I can. So I go f5. My opponent plays e5, good move. Knight b5, queen c6, again a good move. Also, taking with the bishop was the best, by the way. So credit to my opponent. This is another kid, by the way. I don't know why I'm playing so many kids. Yeah, queen c6, and now I go bishop g5, just trying to create like any possible cheese, like takes, knight d6 with a fork. Just trying to create cheese. Of course, my opponent's good, so it doesn't work. He takes, I take with a rook d8, just trying to keep the pawn. Now I go rook d3. I was worried about knight e4 here because if I take, then there's actually queen c5. And if I move the king, then there's a fork, so I'd have to block with the knight, and then if the king takes, then I have to go rook e3, because then it gets out of the pin, but then my opponent spit the knight back, and then I have to go queen d2. And then, yeah. I was afraid of this, but luckily my opponent played e4 instead. Not the best move. I'm supposed to play rook g3 here, but like the problem is that I'm still down a pawn, and yeah, my opponent's just like getting consolidated, so I didn't like this. So I went rook d4 instead because I'm just trying to like win the pawn back because I'm thinking like, okay, I'm down material. If I can win back the pawn, then the end game I can at least, if I play well, I can probably hold. Or if my opponent messes up, I can try to push because like in the long run, this pawn a5 is a little bit weak, and like if I win it, I'll immediately have a passed pawn. So that's like so far in the future, but it's just wishful thinking. Okay, my opponent plays d5 logical, and now I take, and I go for this like puzzle rush, takes, knight c7. But my opponent kind of tunnel visioned. He could actually castle here. And if he castles here, I'm completely busted. This is very subtle, but like by castling, the king is safe, and like I have to take, right? Or like it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't even matter where I go. Like the rook's gonna come to c8, and this is terrible for white because the pawn is so far advanced. This pawn is just a passed pawn. I'm still down a pawn. This pawn's hanging, this knight is not doing anything, it's completely blocked out. The rook's in the corner, king's exposed, queen's getting attacked. Like all my pieces are just getting like completely mogged right now. Like bishop's mogging the knight, like queen's mogging the queen, and rook's mogging the rook. Pawn is just here. King is completely safe. So even though black's only down up one pawn, it's just minus infinity. And I'll show you like an example. If I go queen e2, it's queen c5, and just taking this pawn. This pawn's hanging, and then like every piece is just gonna come in. And I can see my opponent missed this because like there's no tactic. It's not a tactic. Like castling isn't a tactic, but it's just so strong. So yeah, this is kind of so I'm pretty lucky that I was like playing a kid because kids are like obviously they're very strong, but they're not very experienced. So like experienced player might think here and then realize that okay, wait, if I take, then we get this fork, but I can actually castle here, and then move the other rook into the game, and my pieces are a lot better. Okay, but we get this endgame, which is obviously, well, okay, like it's not like taking as a mistake, or it's like a blunder, lending the advantage. Of course, black's still up a pawn here, and I still have to figure something out. So, okay, here I play rook e1, and this is also very frustrating because I should have played rook to d1 first, because now I can actually, what is it? I was trying to go knight to c4 and attack that pawn a4, but by going rook to e1, I allow bishop to bishop here, which stops that idea. I can no longer go knight to e3. So I was very frustrated about that as well, but now my opponent kind of lets me a little bit back into the game. He thinks for a long time and plays king to e5. So the idea is obviously to take this pawn, but I can check on e3. My opponent repeats to gain time, logical. But the point is, if my opponent takes, I have g4, very important resource, because if my opponent takes the pawn, I have this fork. I'm going to win the bishop. That's kind of, yeah. Okay, so my opponent goes back. I take the pawn, of course. And now I'm kind of starting to get back into the game because look at this. The rook is still in the corner. My rook's very active in the center. The king is kind of exposed now. So and now the knight's on this kind of good defensive post. So my opponent goes to c3, and now I give a check. So now this is getting really good because now we're really close toward like being okay. So my opponent goes to g6, another kind of mistake. Because now after rook f5, I'm threatening a very nasty checkmate. So let's say my opponent tries to protect the pawn. I have knight to f4, king to h6, and now rook to h5. This is just like a checkmate in 2. So my opponent has to defend against that. And because my opponent has to defend against that, I can take this pawn on a5. And if I can take this pawn on a5, then remember back when I was saying if I can win this pawn, I get a passed pawn. Then I get a passed pawn. And if I have a passed pawn, then I have winning chances. So now I'm getting very optimistic. My opponent plays f6. I'm very happy to see that. I take the pawn, and now I get up from the board, because then the reason I get up from the board is because just to cool down and like, okay, I know that I'm at least equalizing here, and I used to have a really bad position, so now I'm just calming down, getting up for a walk, looking at the other games, and out of the corner of my eye, I see my opponent playing b3, and this is a huge blunder, and I realized immediately it's a blunder, because, okay, well, obviously the idea is that it's a discovered attack and it's trying to win the pawn, right? If I attack the bishop like this, he has b2. And obviously this is my opponent's idea. But I have to set to f4 check. Very important in between move. And still my opponent can't go to h6 because of the checkmate, and he has to go back. But, and this is I think where my opponent stopped calculating, or maybe my opponent just completely missed on a knight f4 check entirely. I have rook to a7, and the knight this is like kind of a second rank back rank checkmate, because my opponent can't go back, but he has to go back, and once it goes back, then I have the skewer. And this is really cool, because even if he goes back, it looks like the king's close to the rook, but because of this like configuration, my opponent has to give up the rook like this. So this happened in the game, okay, I actually thought for like kind of a diabolical amount of time here. I thought for like 5 minutes before taking the rook, and it was because I was thinking about c takes b3, and they're like honestly equally good. The point is, I'm still threatening to win the rook. Obviously, my opponent can't castle. That would be really bad if my opponent could castle. But like my opponent has to solve the problem, and while he does that, I would basically achieve this end game where I'm like just clean 2 pawns up, and I know I can win this game, like no problems at all. But I also know that if I win a free rook, I can also win that no problems at all. So I was calculating check, king b7 here, b2, rook b8, and now bishop to e5. I have to give up the knight, of course, but it's okay. I take, he takes, and okay. So I was thinking, do I want this endgame, or do I want this endgame? Like, they're both completely winning. Like I would have no problem winning any of these against like Stockfish Premium Pro like Ultra like Evo Stockfish. But like I was just thinking like, okay, which one would I rather play? Because I have like 56 minutes. I basically have infinite time to decide. So I just want to make my life as easy as possible, because this is also my last game. I'm just trying to go home. I'm very happy to be winning though. I'm very happy to be winning the game though. Considering how the opening went. So I ended up going for the rook, which is like completely reasonable. My opponent ends up taking, not even going for the like bishop b5 fork line. So now I'm just able to stop the pawn. So I stopped the pawn at take, and my opponent resigns. So I ended up with 4 out of 5, which is like a really good result in an out-of-state tournament. In Idaho, usually I'm like drawing at most one game. But in Seattle or like Washington, it's like bigger chess. Like I played a GM. This is like a pretty fun tournament. I did pretty well. And actually the GM, like after beating me, drew both of his last games. So he also ended up on 4 out of 5, and so did 3 other people. So we actually had a 5-way tie for first. So like obviously we split the entire prize fund, but like there's like a trophy with like your name on it, and they're only gonna print one name. So we actually had this really fun 5-way playoff, and how it worked was I was in the bottom 2 tiebreaks because that's just how the tiebreaks were. So I played. So it was how it worked is it was basically a bracket. So it was 4 versus 5. I played the fifth tiebreak. I won that blitz game. They were all Armageddon. 5 minutes for white, 4 minutes for black. Black has draw odds. And I won the first game, and then I had to play the GM again, which is kind of dumb. But yeah, I got destroyed in that blitz game, and then the blitz. But the final game, like once it got down to 2 players, that last game was really cool, or it was really like exciting. Well, like okay, like well like the GM had white. He didn't play very well, and it was like in a huge trouble. But then he like got a really nasty swindle. It was like 2 rooks here and then a pawn on g6, king on e8, and it was this mating net. Even though black had 2 pawns here, it was just really like a lot of aura. But yeah, and then there's the blitz tournament after that, and that was also really fun. So yeah, really good experience here. My rating's now 2175. So this summer I gained 55 points, and like gaining points above 2000 is so hard, especially when I live in Idaho. So I'm really happy about that, and I'm getting closer to NM. And once I get NM, I will be playing my first title to Tuesday. So thank you all so much for watching. If you made it all the way back, if you made it all the way to this point in the video, thanks so much for your support. And comment which game was your favorite, which move was your favorite maybe, and or just any video ideas. What do you want to see? Or if you never want me to upload again, you can also say that. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.